Thanks, Tim. Representative Dave Murphy was elected to the Wisconsin State Assembly in November 2012. He was educated at the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh, Fox Valley, and the Wisconsin School of Real Estate. Representative Murphy chairs the Assembly Committee on Colleges and Universities and has worked extensively on higher education, including a recent bill designed to offer financial incentives to out-of-state University of Wisconsin system graduates who remain in the state for at least 2 years following graduation. And last but certainly not least, Mike Knetter is the past dean of Wisconsin School of Business and is currently the president and chief executive officer of the University of Wisconsin Foundation, the official fundraising arm of the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Knetter was a senior staff economist for Bill Clinton and George H.W. Bush, and before becoming dean of the Wisconsin School of Business, he worked as a professor and as the associate dean at the Amos Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth College. He is a graduate of Rhinelander High School. So we have a panelist of Wisconsinites here for us all today. Well, thanks, gentlemen. Let's just jump right in. The topic of this panel is the health of UW-Madison and the university's statewide impact. Let's start with the first half of that. Is UW-Madison healthy? What are the top obstacles facing the university right now? Mike, you want to start us off?
Sure. Well, yes, UW-Madison is very healthy. We're one of the great universities in the world by most measures. But I would say we're a little bit less healthy than we were 10 or even 20 years ago in relative terms. And in some ways, that's not surprising. We're a public university in the upper Midwest, and the upper Midwest region has been a bit challenged economically due to globalization and technological trends that have made it a little bit more difficult for manufacturing and agriculture to be as profitable as they were, say, 20 or 30 years ago. So that's complicated the funding mix for the university, and what we've seen really over the last decade, really in 10 years, state appropriations today are almost exactly what they were in dollar terms 10 years ago. I think down to the 10,000th of a dollar, if you will. So almost exactly the same. And tuition's been frozen now for 8 years, and in-state undergraduate tuition, I should say. And those two elements are pretty big parts of the revenue stream of the university. And we've tried to grow other areas of the funding mix, philanthropy, grant getting by faculty members, corporate partnerships, but that growth hasn't been enough to offset the stagnation in some of the other revenue streams. So in revenue growth, we've really lagged all of our 15 peers, kind of a Big 10 plus peer group over the last 20 years. And if you lag in revenue growth, that eventually is going to compromise your faculty hiring, your student acquisition. So, and you see it in our rankings. So our health isn't as great as it used to be. There are some understandable reasons for that, but I think it's on all of us to figure out what are the regulatory and other changes we can make to ensure that our flagship campus is strong. Because I'll tell you, the world's not going to be less technology intensive 10 years from now. It's going to be more. And if you want to have a place in that growing part of the economy, you couldn't have a better industry to be a leader in than the knowledge production industry.
Mm-hmm. Tim, what's your perspective from a Board of Regents, just coming off the Regents?
Well, I do believe that I should echo what Mike has said. UW-Madison is healthy, but challenged. And I think the challenges come from the changing structure of the state government, which is a direct response to the changing ideas of the people of the state, the electors. I mean, the fact is that, I look at Dave's situation when it comes to budget, and I see an individual who is, I know because we worked very closely together when I was on the Board of Regents, very concerned about the UW system in general and about UW-Madison in specific, and would like to put more state resources towards system into Madison, but is challenged because we have a Medicaid program that is just growing like topsy. And as a result, we have our legislators who are by and large support the UW system, though they may have an attitude about Madison, and because they come from Menominee or Eau Claire or something like that, but nevertheless understand how important the system is to the state, but are frustrated by the fact that within the financial constraints that we deal with, they're not able to support it in the financially as they'd like.
Dave, let's talk about this misperception that folks have. I think Tim brings up a good point in terms of the perception that folks from Menominee or Rhinelander might have about UW-Madison. How does that play out in the Capitol when we know that UW-Madison is such a huge economic engine for this state?
Well, there's always an issue about the politics of Madison, Milwaukee versus the politics of the outstate voters, and sometimes they feel like they're getting shortchanged. Sometimes they are. But there's no question that UW-Madison is a tremendous driver for the economy, and so it's important that it stay one of the very, very highest ranking universities in the country, and I believe that will happen, will continue to happen. I think the university is in good shape, but I think it's always important to be vigilant, and we always need to stay on top of and realize that it's going to take a lot of work to stay on top, because somebody's always going to be trying to knock you off when you're up there. I think there may be some misconceptions about what's going to keep you on top and what's important. I think sometimes we look at the amount of revenue that maybe another university is generating, the amount of tuition that other institutions are charging, and think that that's where we need to go. And I don't always know that we're reading the signs properly. And whether it's a university, a business, government, or a family, the ability to have your finances under control and being spent properly is very important. Because if you don't do that, your future will not be bright, your future will be more bleak. And as some of these universities in other areas keep increasing their tuition, they're going to find out that at some point there's going to be a block there. And it's going to be very difficult for them to continue with that. And if you become addicted to all that tuition, and all of a sudden things start turning the other way, you can be in a big problem.
So all three of you have brought up the tuition, so let's talk about that.
Sure.
The tuition freeze is certainly a part of any conversation about, as we talk about university revenue. We recently saw UW Regents President Drew Peterson join Badgers United in favor of thawing the tuition freeze. Mike, do you want to start us out talking about how the University of Wisconsin Foundation looks at the tuition freeze?
Well, and I don't want to pretend I'm speaking for all donors. I do run the foundation, and I have views about what it takes to be a healthy and successful university. And I think it takes a diversity of revenue streams to be successful. And there are a lot of ways to look at tuition, and I'm very sensitive to the perspective that Representative Murphy just articulated about affordability. But at UW-Madison, at least, we've made a commitment to families in the state that if you're median income or below, we will find the aid you need to cover all tuition and fees without any loans involved for any student in that category. And that's not just for those students. Those students will get the last dollar to make it affordable. But even beyond that level of income, of course, people are still getting support, so it doesn't terminate at that point abruptly. So we're finding the resources to keep it affordable, and probably, as it turns out at Madison, because of that additional private support we can put toward the cost of education, our net price could well be lower than any other school in the system, which is odd when you think about it. So we think tuition, is something that needs to be discussed. We have to reflect on it. The value of our degree is extraordinary. I mean, we have more out-of-state applicants than we have spots in the freshman class, and their tuition is $36,000 a year, tuition and fees. In-state is 10. So the subsidy that we're, in effect, giving to in-state students is $26,000 per student. At almost 20,000 in-state students, that's $520 million of discounted tuition right there. That's more than we get in state appropriations. So that's a pretty, I would say all those things kind of point to this is a pretty good deal. We've created a great institution. It has great value. It's recognized in the marketplace. And I don't know what the right price of tuition is, but I'd say right now we're lower than we should be, and we should be more concerned, at Madison at least, about our health and our quality versus our affordability, because we've guaranteed the affordability through Bucky's tuition promise that Chancellor Blank rolled out.
And Tim, I know you did some work around the tuition on your tenure on the Board of Regents. Can you talk about this with us?
Sure, but let me first start off by saying that there have been some effects of the tuition freeze that are salutary. I'll give you an example that is close to my heart because I work closely with the admissions department at Madison, because our alumni group in the Fox Valley brings, we got a Hmong student recruitment program. So for 20 years we've been bringing a bunch of Hmong students down here to hopefully get them interested in enrolling when the time comes. One of the things that we've heard as objections from Madison alums and parents of Madison students is the fact that compared to other excellent universities, the admissions process at Madison is, to put it kindly, hands-off. And that has shocked and disappointed some people. Because Chancellor Blank was intelligent and is an economist and knows all this good stuff, she came to the Regents with a trade-off. She said, look, you take the cap off of my out-of-state student enrollment people, and I will guarantee that we're going to enroll, not admit, but enroll at least 3,600 Wisconsin students each year. And that's a good thing, except it makes the rest of the system very concerned, because if the requirement is that Chancellor Blank has to enroll 3,600 Wisconsin students, and if her decision is, well, what I'm going to do is we'll drop our minimum requirements a smidge, that takes the best and the brightest away from La Crosse or Parkside or Oshkosh or whatever. And what I've seen, and I'm very happy to have seen it, is that the Chancellor is making a decision to go in a different direction. And that direction has to do with the fact that, again, in the Valley we have this annual academic scholars, the newspaper runs this, and so you see 78 kids who were nominated by their school districts who are outstanding students. And there are a little blurb about each of them, and for years and years I've been following this. And it used to be that 30 to 40% of those kids planned to go to Madison. And then it dropped into the high 20s and then to the mid 20s. Chancellor Blank has said, we're going to go after those top students who are going out of state. We're going to try our very best to keep the best and the brightest students coming here. And I think that's going to make a huge difference in our state because of workforce development and because of, these are the people who do the startups. Okay, so that's I think, a salutary effect that we shouldn't ignore about the fact that there was pressure put on the institution because of the tuition freeze. But the fact is that we have an opportunity now to transfer the tuition setting policy from the legislature and the governor back to the Board of Regents. I was the chair of the tuition setting policy task force that nobody ever heard about because when there's a tuition freeze, you don't have to talk about tuition setting policy. Story of my life. And I think the task force identified some very important influences. And that is that it's important for each of our university campuses to make an ask that is reflective of its particular role within the UW system and within the university market. And to a certain extent, we said we need to have not a tuition ask for the system, but individual tuition asks for the various campuses that can be justified based on a certain set of criteria. And I think that if we get the university back, or you get the tuition setting policy back, implementing a campus-by-campus rational request for tuition increases, we're going to see people doing a better job of identifying what their missions are and thus identifying where their market is for students. So I will shut up now. Thank you for
Representative Murphy, you've been working on this tuition freeze in the Capitol. Why don't you share your work and if there's any momentum inside the Capitol for thawing this kind of tuition freeze?
Amber, when this tuition freeze first began, some of the CPA caucus, some CPAs in the Assembly, were looking at the account balances in the university. The tuition account was relatively high. I think it was shocking to them at the time. I think as we go back and look at it, while it was maybe a bit high, it probably wasn't nearly as out of whack as what it would seem. So the tuition freeze went into place. Over time, I came under the feeling that maybe it shouldn't last so long. And a few years ago, I had drafted a bill that would sort of move us away from the tuition freeze to a new tuition setting policy. That bill never got introduced. It just didn't seem like it was going to be able to go anywhere. We went back and pulled that bill up again and started working on it, and there's beginning to be there's a beginnings of more, I think, support for that. I think we feel like after an extended freeze here, our tuition has been held in check pretty well, and we're in pretty good shape. So the tuition bill I have out there would allow for, or would mandate cohort tuition. So we would try to sell it to the public that when your student, when your young person starts in school, they will know how much their tuition is going to be while they're in school, because their tuition would be locked for 4 years. However, the university would be able to raise the tuition every year for the new class coming in, and that tuition would be capped at the rate of the consumer price index. So it's really not overly complicated. The one thing that we did do, when people look at cohort tuition, and it's been tried around the country, some people say, well, it's not been that popular, it's not worked that well. One of the things I've found with cohort tuition is in too many places, I think they tried to make it way too complicated, in which they tried to cover every problem that could possibly come up with a student that they couldn't graduate in the 4 years in which their tuition was frozen. And what I have said is that we're just not going to go there. We're going to keep this very simple. It's for 4 years. If you have to go a 5th year, that's the way it goes. If for some reason your college career is interrupted when you come back, you're going to be at the new rate. You can be locked in for 4 years from that date. But I think we need something that is very simple to understand, something that's very simple for the university to administrate. I don't want to give the university some kind of a proposal that's going to take, a ton of work for them to keep track of. I want it to be very simple.
Mike, do you have reactions to that?
Well, I haven't seen the details of the bill or the proposed bill, so I don't think it would be wise for me to comment in any depth. But I think anything that puts tuition on some kind of autopilot, you know, it's a little bit dangerous. You know, I think I wish we could make more rational decisions. So, for example, one thing I'd be concerned about is, does this mean that you think the relative pricing of tuition across our four-year institutions at this moment is correct today? Because I'm not sure I would agree with that. Maybe if there was some revisiting of, you know, what the relative prices ought to be across these institutions so that we could achieve a mix of excellence and affordability and different gradations, and then maybe start a process where, you know, there's a smooth movement. I never understood, frankly, why when we set tuition each year, it's an increase that applies to every institution in the system equally. You know, that just strikes me as a little bit unusual, because they're really different institutions in very different markets. And,
Sure.
you know, I guess it's administratively easier, but, you know, so those are just a couple thoughts.
I would just like to, you know, Mike, you talk about whether tuition is right today or not. That's a discussion that we could have in this room, and every single person might have a slightly different opinion on it. But the process that we have, where we do a budget every 2 years, and the state puts in funding for the UW, I think then that would be the appropriate time for us to say, well, maybe because tuition has been held flat for 8 years, maybe that number that number for state contribution needs to be increased somewhat. And that would be then the place where you could do that. Could we use a different index rather than CPI for this? Some have suggested that. So that could be a possibility.
So I think you bring up another good point. In the last 40 years, state support for UW-Madison has gone from 43% to 14%. As citizens, is this something we should be concerned about? Mike?
Well, you know, I think, as was mentioned earlier, I mean, there are a lot of calls on the state budget. And I guess when I moved here in 2002 from, admittedly, a private institution, you know, I learned a lot. I think I was kind of naive then. I thought I was just moving from one university to another university, and I thought of universities as an organizational type. But a private university and a state agency are actually different types of things, you know. So it's a more complex environment, to be sure. But, you know, very quickly, I think I came to the conclusion as an economist, I didn't expect state appropriations would grow over time. I thought we could maybe hope that they'd stay about where they were in 2003, 2004, and that in fact is about right. And that the real way that the university could be successful, you know, I always used to say when I was business dean, you know, some of the best business schools in the country don't get a dime of state money. You know, we at least get some. And what we need is some deregulation so that we can compete with the best. And some of that deregulation needs to be, in my opinion, in tuition setting. So that part of the equation needs to be healthier than it is today. And I think it's evident in the value people get from the UW-Madison degree, whether you look at salaries of graduates 5 years, 10 years out. You know, it's justified. It's justified by what you see people paying out of state to come to UW-Madison. So I think that revenue stream needs to get healthier. We could use some help in deregulation in bonding authority for capital projects. We could use some help in the process by which capital projects are undertaken. A lot of these things kind of chip away at the university's effectiveness, efficiency, timeliness on different things. So I don't think it has to be all about money. I kind of understand where we are with money because of the other calls, but I think there needs to be thoughtful consideration about deregulation. And I know people think, oh, you know, how could they possibly run their own affairs? Well, you know, our provost just got hired to run the University of Rochester. There's no state oversight at the University of Rochester. You know, these academic administrators move around. They're capable of making good decisions in the interest of the organization. And, you know, I feel like we're in a situation where we have to decide are we going to be able to make the regulatory changes we need for Madison to remain one of the best research universities in the world or not? That's really what's in front of us, and I don't think state appropriations is the solution to that. I actually feel like I understand why we are where we are. So that'd be my perspective on that.
You know, Representative Murphy, one of the things that he just mentioned was the bonding authority, and I know you've worked extensively on this topic. Why don't you give us your perspective on bonding projects and the bonding authority?
We actually had bonding authority built into one of our pieces of legislation that we were working on, and we took it out. And it was mainly because I didn't think that that could gain enough support to be passed. So I pulled that portion out.
Why do you think
Go ahead.
I just wonder, you know, every other flagship in the country has that authority. Why can't we build support for it here? Is it that people in Wisconsin understand something that everybody else is missing, or what? I don't understand kind of how the politics work around
Mike,
here.
that is a very, very good question. Do we understand something that other people don't? I think in many ways we have a great university here. We do have some of the lowest tuition rates in the Big Ten. Maybe we are doing it right and they're doing it wrong. I mean, you have to take that into consideration. That's certainly a possibility. Sometimes politics are a lot about timing. When is the appropriate time to do something? When is something going to work and when is it not going to work? You know, and as I was working on some of these things, you know, the Oshkosh Foundation thing comes up. You know, and that's a problem. And then this spring, I was, you know, some issues came up with at Whitewater with them purchasing or leasing a facility from their foundation, and that was a problem, I think. So these are the things that make changes difficult because they give the other side ammunition to use against you.
Tim, let's pivot to professor pay. I think we're all familiar up on this stage, certainly many of you in the audience, with professors are overpaid and they don't do anything. So can you give us your perspective on professor pay and whether you agree or disagree with some of these statements?
I would love to do that.
I thought you might.
Thank you. We have an oversight group, the legislature, who sees salary structures within the UW system campuses. And I think often people focus on salaries for administrators and not faculty members. And it's fortunate in one sense because if you talk about the reason for the unparalleled growth in the cost of higher education, it's because we're constantly adding administrators. And so it's important that our legislators, our oversight group, be aware of that being where our explosive costs are coming from. But on the other hand, it's also important to realize that our faculty members are underpaid. We're underpaid even here at Madison, where because of federal grant dollars, there is a certain amount of money that the chancellor can move around in order to keep faculty members who are being poached by other major institutions. And you know, we're blessed to have that flexibility here on this campus. We do not have that flexibility on other campuses in the system. And as a result, we lose good faculty members all the time. And I have to, so we're underpaid, the proof is in the pudding, we're losing faculty members. Now, the other side of that question is, are the faculty members in general working very hard? And oftentimes, what you see is an analysis of a professor who is, you know, paid $200,000 a year, but she's only teaching one class, or maybe no classes. Of course, you know, that was a big issue on talk radio several years ago. The problem with that is they don't acknowledge the fact that that professor she's probably bringing in $1 million a year in grants from outside the university. So the fact that she's got a program that's $1 million a year program or even more, and has to keep those grants coming because it requires keeping being productive and making progress. So she's got to do the research, but she's also in a situation where she's not able to. She's teaching graduate students who are who she's working with on a one-on-one basis. She's not necessarily teaching a class. These are nuances that we don't do a very good job of explaining, or that those who would like to attack us don't do a very good job of hearing. Mm-hmm. I've got to give you an example. I just came from the Wisconsin Science and Technology Symposium at UW-Stout. This is a gathering of faculty and students who are engaged in basic or applied research. So we've got faculty members who are working with students who are solving problems, usually that are problems that are presented by businesses in their communities. I've got a problem with this or that, and the next thing, can you help me fix this in your material science department? And a professor will take that over. And we'll actually engage students in fixing the problem. Well, the faculty members who were there are often mentoring students who are at this conference who are presenting their research in a posters. Many of you have heard of posters in the rotunda. Well, these are students who are doing essentially the same thing at this conference. What nobody seems to realize is that you've got these professors who are teaching 3 and 4 classes a semester, and at the same time, excuse me, not a semester, in an academic year, and at the same time are giving their time and their effort to the student mentoring, for which they get no pay. They get, and often they don't even get kudos from their department for doing that. So I've got to say that from the faculty members that I have met across the system and here at Madison, bend over backwards to make sure that we get good value from the efforts they put in.
Mike, I think we know that all 72 counties in Wisconsin see value from Madison, and there's $1.2 billion in research funding. The foundation has undertaken efforts to help spread this word, and can you walk us through what you're doing to help drive this message across the state?
Well, probably not, because I'm the dumbest guy on the stage, because I left one of those faculty jobs where I was overpaid and had nothing to do. Can you imagine? What was I thinking? I do want to just add one point to that, and I think Tim did a great job of articulating real-world example of it. But at a high level, the university takes in more revenue in research grant funding than it does in tuition. So why would we be surprised that, on average, faculty at UW-Madison would be spending more of their time on research than on classroom activity? I mean, that's what a research university is, and it shows up in the revenue. So I think Tim's right. It's a different kind of job, and you see it in the data, and we're a different kind of university because of that. Project 72 is something we did undertake several years ago at the foundation to go out into the counties of Wisconsin with stories about ways alumni contribute to the health and welfare of the county, so high-achieving alums around the state. But we also purchased and refurbished an old ice cream delivery truck, and even though it only goes 55 miles per hour top end, and you can't run it, I think, for more than 2 hours at a crack, we do go out to a lot of community events, serve up Babcock ice cream, and try to engage citizens, and we have leave behind material that we try to address some of the myths about well, you can't get into Madison from in-state. Well, 2/3 of in-state applicants are offered admission. Madison's too expensive. 52% of our students graduate with 0 debt. Of those that have debt, the median is about $25,000 to $30,000, depending on the year. So our whole initiative is aimed at getting out and correcting what we think are some of the most significant myths that are out there that maybe erode confidence and trust in the institution. And a lot of these things are founded in some real truths about higher ed nationally, or about certain institutions nationally, where tuition really is out of control. I have a daughter who's going to go to a school next year, and the cost of attendance is going to be $70,000, and then they said, oh, by the way, your health insurance isn't good enough for us. We're going to charge you an extra $4,000. I'm like, well, it's just breakage at that point, So we're a great value, and we're just trying to get out and connect with people around the state and let them know and build awareness and, bring a little goodwill around the state. So we think that's been a valuable campaign and really aimed at getting better information out there and contributing to the conversation. Because I would not want Representative Murphy's job. I think it is really hard, given all the sources of information that are out there on both sides, to try to set the record straight about what the facts are and lead a conversation that tries to get us to maybe an outcome that, while not in every single person's interest, might be in the best interest of the state. It's really hard to do right now. And hopefully what we're doing is going to complement what you're trying to do to get the best information out there and make the best decisions we can about how to move forward together.
Representative Murphy, what should we be doing inside the Capitol? How do we build awareness of the university's impact inside the Capitol?
I think the awareness is actually pretty good. I think we understand, we talk an awful lot about the university being an economic engine and the amount of jobs and the amount of economic growth that it adds to the economy. So I think that's pretty well known. I think the most important thing in the Capitol for the university is to continue to show that you're doing things in an efficient manner, and to build that trust with legislators that they know when they put that money in there that it's going to be spent wisely.
Great. Tim, I think you're in a really unique position as both a business leader and a regent emeritus. What, in your estimation, should be done to help build a broader conversation across the state about the impact of UW-Madison?
I think the first thing that, we're talking to an audience of people who are dedicated to the proposition that the UW-Madison is the jewel in the crown of our system, as Patrick Lucy said when he signed the merger bill. And I think that we should all be proud of the fact that not only has the state government followed through on that commitment that Madison would be the jewel in the crown, but that the administration and faculty at UW-Madison have made sure that the institution deserved that distinction. But when we talk about raising consciousness and building friends around the state, I think we have to realize that Madison is part of a system, and that the people in, well, I was just in Menominee at Stout, that institution is beloved of their people, that the people at Oshkosh really are supporters of UW-Oshkosh, and that if you try to differentiate UW-Madison too strongly from the institutions that they find close to their hearts, we're not going to be building the kinds of friendships that we need when it comes time for the legislators to make a decision about the UW system in general, because they tend to focus on their campus. And you can understand why. Those campuses are building jobs and educating students from their hometowns. So I think just in general that a collaborative approach to the issue of resource allocation within the state budget is something that we should focus on, because I think that's our best opportunity to build the friends that are going to make us all the boats rise.
Representative Murphy?
You know, and Tim brings up, and I would agree with him very much, that, you know, at budget time, the universities, the system really sticks together in lobbying for operating funds from the legislature, and everybody sticks together real well there. But there's another budget, and that's the capital budget. And when capital budget comes, then it's a little bit of a different story, because one institution wants $100 million over here for this building, and another institution wants $100 million over there for another building. And then that becomes much more of a winner-loser type of proposition. And that's where, you know, where you get them butting heads just a little bit of, you know, my project's more important than your project, or vice versa. So always keep in mind you have those two different budgets that the institutions are vying for.
Great. Let's just talk about, Mike, one thing that I think there's so much misperception about, and I think it's a good example of the kind of work that the foundation is doing. University athletics, we're hearing all the time, they're so rich, why don't you just get money from them? They could help with more. Instead of funding them, fund education. Can you talk about what the foundation is doing there?
Well, and it's not really as much the foundation as it is athletics itself. And, you know, athletics, to me, offers the great parable or playbook for how we should be thinking about the university. You know, if you go back to 1980, UW Athletics did get a fair bit of state support. It was a meaningful part of the athletics budget. It was very affordable and accessible to go to a Badger game. Prices were really cheap, and it was no problem getting a seat. In fact, at Camp Randall, I think probably 3/4 of the seats were empty the last game before Barry Alvarez showed up. And, you know, it's sort of interesting, fast forward to today, athletics is kind of financially on its own bottom now. It's a mix of program revenue and private funding. And what we've seen is, you know, on a program revenue standpoint, things were loosened up considerably in terms of their control over ticket prices. And that's how you generate a lot of revenue, through the hockey programs, basketball, and especially football, right? And today we have a really healthy athletic department. It isn't cheap to go to a Badger game anymore, but there is excess demand. I don't know anyone who doesn't want to go to Badger games these days, or anyone who's ever said to me, gee, Mike, wasn't it great back in the 80s when football was really cheap? Nobody's ever said that to me. So it's not quite as accessible and affordable, but it's high quality. And what I think we learned is that Wisconsin residents want to pay for quality. And we've been able to deliver that in the athletic program. And today, they don't get state support. In fact, athletics does transfer some money back to the university thanks to some of the TV contracts that we have today. So it's a fantastic story, and it's one that I think more people should think about, because I think a lot of the deregulation that occurred around athletics is what the playbook needs to be for the university writ large. And hats off, you know, a lot of that work was done by, you know, Donna Shalala, Pat Richter, Barry Alvarez, alums like Wade Fetzer, Ab Nicholas, Ted Kellner. They were really central to the renaissance of Wisconsin athletics. And it's a great story, and I think it is kind of the recipe for me for how UW-Madison as a whole could move forward more effectively.
Go ahead, Tim.
I think you got to understand, I was a cheerleader when John Cotto was a coach, and I point out that you know, even then people didn't leave the stadium after the game was over. But as opposed to having a fifth quarter, they were too drunk or too stoned, because that was the only thing they came to the game to do. So the Mike's remarks about the wonderfulness of the increasing quality of our program is certainly telling, and it's been an enormous success. I have a little anecdote. Our chief financial officer here at Madison is a ex-Berkeley guy, and at one point we were chatting. This was at a football game, as a matter of fact, and he said, "Tim, you know, I was completely flabbergasted the other day when I received a $1 million+ check from the athletic department for the university." I said, "Really?" You know, I said, "You know, that's always been a pride of UW-Madison, is that, you know, the athletic department pretty much has stood on its own for quite some time." He said, "Yeah, I was at you know, at Berkeley. I would be writing them checks for multi-million dollars to the athletic department from the university."
Like 30.
And he said, "This is an enormous turnaround." So you know, in a sense, our athletics is A, financially so strong. B, it's certainly, I mean, I don't know if you guys go to festivals in your towns. I'm sure you do. We've got an Oktoberfest in Appleton, and I am flabbergasted every year when I'm at Oktoberfest, and I see, God, a good 10% of the people, 100,000 people on the street, are wearing Madison gear. Now, these aren't all Madison alums, but they're people who are proud of their university, and let's face it, many of them know about their university through the athletic program. So we have to be very proud of that. But we also have to be aware that we're seriously challenged because of the arc of popularity of football. And so we have to really be serious about where we're going to go in a world where fewer and fewer young people are taking part in football programs, and that's the major funder for our athletic department. So just want to make a couple
Great
points.
insight. So, gentlemen, we're getting close to wrapping up here. As we do so, I'll give you each some time to answer this question. What do each of you see as critical next steps for university leadership, elected officials, and Wisconsin citizens to maintain the world-class institution we treasure here in this state? And Tim, you want to start us off?
Yes, thank you. The main point, I think, for UW-Madison and you know, is effective collaboration with other campuses as to enhance the reputation and effectiveness of the UW system in the minds of our friends in the legislature. That means that from the point of view of UW administration, we have to open up even more than we have to collaborative opportunities across the system. As far as our elected officials, I think our elected officials have to become comfortable with the state's finances. It's awfully hard when you're an elected official to listen to a pitch from somebody like me, an alumni advocate, about giving more money to the UW system when you've got people out there who are saying, but grandma's got cancer and we can't pay for it, and so Badger Care and Medicaid have to be expanded in order to take care of those very immediate, very personal needs. And so I'm hoping that we can maintain a strong financial base in the state so that it allows the legislators to actually make those tough decisions with some confidence about where the revenue is coming from. So thank you.
Representative?
I would agree with Tim that whenever we look at the university in the legislature, you know, it's mainly during the budget cycle, and there are so many competing interests that are going on, whether it's Medicaid, whether it's K-12 schools. I got a handout from the university recently, you know, showing a 24-to-1 payback on investments at the university. And, you know, the first thing I have to ask myself is, well, what's the payback in my local elementary school? Or what is the payback to the health of the families that are on Medicaid? Or, you know, it's just, it's on, and the state has, you know, many things that we have to do. Earlier we were talking about professors and what they're paid. And one of my big pushes in this last budget was salaries, because I looked around the state and I saw a market for people and that market was strong and the cost was going up. I'm a conservative and I'm a free market person. And I look at that and say, I can't ignore that market. I have to, that market dictates that we need to do something. And so we had situations, for instance, where prison guards, we didn't have enough prison guards. I found out they were making $16.35 an hour to start. Well, I got to tell you, I looked at that and I said to myself, this, I don't see how this is sustainable. $16.35 an hour is not going to hire enough people to do this job. When we look at college professors, are they being paid enough or not? Some of them certainly are being underpaid, and I'm sure there are some that are probably being overpaid. But we also have a system in place where it's not so easy to get rid of the one who's being overpaid. And then when you come to the legislature and say, well, now we want a pot of money to help retain the best ones, sometimes you get some pushback on that, because people would like to be able to get rid of some of the ones that aren't as good to be able to pay the better ones more. So this is always the tug of war that's being played in the legislature to find out what is the appropriate level, whether it's for professor pay, whether it's for the state amount that's put into a university for operations, or whether it's for building projects on campus.
Mike, close us up.
Well, if I had a magic wand, I guess the first thing I would want is I'd want to know who could possibly be the trusted convener of the discussion about what we want out of our university system. And I think that is a big challenge right now. And you know, one of the reasons I think Badgers United was created is it really isn't clear who is the natural convener. Is it the governor, the legislature, the regents, people in system administration, people at the campuses? You know, Madison's kind of afraid to move because we don't want to be seen as too pushy or a bully. But somebody needs to be a convener. We need to kind of arrive at a consensus or a shared vision about what we want out of our UW system. And in particular, what do we want out of the research institutions, the other four-year campuses, the 2 years? You need a shared vision. And then we could probably do with tidying up our governance and financial model, because I think a lot of people don't even understand who is empowered to make which key strategic decisions that are important to the university. And they're parsed out in such a way, it'd be a miracle if we ever, you know, made a bunch of the right decisions, you know, that were somehow coordinated. And, you know, as much as he left the governorship in disgrace, one of the last things Eliot Spitzer put out as a press release, it was about the New York university system, and he said, I was getting really upset with the system because I thought they weren't performing efficiently. And you know, he's a pretty good attorney, say what you will about anything else about him, but he's a pretty good lawyer. And he said, you know, I looked into the governance documents, and he said, I understand why the system isn't functioning very well, because I wouldn't even know who to go to fix it. And you know, I do think there are aspects of that. So to me, it's you need a convener, we need a shared vision, and then we probably need to pay some attention to, do we have the right governance and financial model? And a lot of what we talk about at any point in time are the little things at the margin that can make things better. You know, can Madison get bonding authority? Can the system get bonding authority? You know, and there are important things to be discussed there, but you know, if I had a magic wand, I'd want to do a big reset, because higher education is too important to the future of the country, to the children in this state, and having a great research university is too important to the economic future of this state. And I think we need to do something about it. Because as much as it is true that we're great today and we do some things differently, I don't think the lack of bonding authority for UW-Madison or the system is what's making us great. And in fact, without some deregulation, we are now going to hit the wall, because appropriations won't grow, tuition is frozen in state, we're probably not going to be able to grow out-of-state enrollment much more, So we really need to address this, and fast.
Great. Please join me in thanking all of our panelists here today. And thank you all for coming. As you head out, please feel free to visit with our board members who will be at the end here, and for the media there will also be availability for the panelists up front. Again, thank you. Look for us to do more of these around the state, and we look forward to speaking with you.